The views expressed in this blog are hosted on my own website, are strictly personal, and do not reflect the views of any organization. Hello and welcome friends to Straight Bat, my weekly video blog where, as the title suggests, I comment with a straight bat. Now, one political truism in this country is where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit. Our NETAS are notorious for saying one thing when they are in the opposition and saying completely the opposite thing when they are in government. That's right. NETAs are known to speak with a forked tongue. But what happens when civil society icons also begin speaking like politicians? Which brings me to the issue of this week, the falling rupee and rising inflation. This week, the rupee has hit a new low against the dollar, 77 rupees 50 paise and counting when I last saw it. No longer quite the sabse bada rupaiya. Which is why I tweeted earlier this week, rupee has hit a new low against dollar, atta prices at an all-time high, but don't worry, a weapon of mass distraction will soon be found. Now, amongst those who responded to my tweet was the former Infosys corporate leader and venture capitalist Mohan Das Pai, and this is how he responded. Rajdeep, globally the dollar has gone up due to Fed interest rates going up. You are sounding more and more silly. Maybe Sanju Varma, the BJP spokesperson, should educate you on this. Now, Mr. Pai, I can tell you in private, is a very warm, convivial man. But in public, he never hides his ideological leanings, especially on social media, where he is always ready to shoot from the hip and target any critic of the government, often in extremely strident language. He is a firm right-wing spokesperson who, as I said, likes to shoot off his comments. Even so, I was a bit surprised with the tone of his tweet and therefore tweeted back gently in response. It seems, Mr. Pai, that even mentioning a fact, and I emphasize a fact, that the rupee is at its lowest against the dollar is enough for you to let off vitriol. Of course, global factors are responsible. Did anyone say otherwise? Do recall though how a falling rupee was once equated to Dr. Singh, Dr. Manmohan Singh's age. Didn't see you get agitated then. Let's be clear, friends. At no stage have I held the Modi government responsible for the falling rupee. What I did say, and which Mr. Pai has chosen to interpret as a political remark, is my belief that this government, indeed any government, but particularly this government, would like to manage the narrative, not put out any bad news like a falling rupee and rising inflation, and therefore distract the public from these real concerns. Look for what I call our weapons of mass distraction, emotional issues often revolving around religious identity that can take the public mind space away from the real concerns over prices or over a falling rupee. And yes, you can whip up emotions with them, with religious issues, and get higher TRP. So that's the point I was trying to make. The point, however, that I wish to also draw attention to is the marked contrast in the manner in which Mr. Pai and his ilk responded this week to the falling rupee and rising inflation, and contrasted with the manner in which they reacted to a similar situation in 2013 when the Manmohan Singh government was also faced with this dual challenge of falling rupee and rising inflation. Of course, the objective conditions between 2013 and 2022 are very different. Yes, the Manmohan Singh government was faced with low international reserves and a high external accounts deficit that made the currency weakened. Yes, a weak coalition government that was being routinely charged with scams and corruption meant that the Manmohan Singh government faced a serious credibility deficit at the time. And yes, some policies of the government could have been much better, no doubt about that. But just like global challenges are being used by Mr. Pai and others to suggest that the war in Ukraine, the rising fuel prices, the US Fed rate hike, China's COVID lockdown, supply side bottlenecks are all responsible for the falling rupee vis-a-vis the dollar in particular, please understand, there were also global issues in UPA2 that were at least partly responsible for the declining rupee. Then too, the US Fed Reserve tapering of quantitative easing measures, tension in Syria, global oil prices were rising even then like now, the Eurozone debt crisis on the back of the 2008 global financial crisis. All of this, in a way, was responsible for our economic crisis. But at no stage did Mr. Pai, or at least I haven't read it anywhere, give the Manmohan Singh government even the slightest benefit of doubt as it tried to tackle a difficult situation with the economy. Mr. Pai, in fact, even suggested to a young man on Twitter at the time that he would be better off leaving the country. In fact, there was a relentless attack on Dr. Singh, accusing him of mishandling the economy. But it isn't just Mr. Pai. There were several other civil society worthies at the time in 2013, worthies who are silent today, who were at the time aggressively speaking out on rising prices and the falling rupee. Which is why, on the straight bat, I thought I would give you a sample, take you down memory lane. First, on the falling rupee. Amitabh Bachchan, superstar to beat superstars, on September 1, 2013 said on Twitter, new word added to English dictionary, rupeed. Verb meaning move downward, typically rapidly and freely without control. Usage, I tripped and rupeed from the stairs. Juhi Chawla, actor, August 21, 2013. The only way the rupee can save itself is by tying a rakhi to the dollar and saying Meri Raksha Karna, Happy Raksha Bandhan. Ashok Pandit, filmmaker, June 26, 2013. Dollar has crossed rupees 60. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for leading the country towards the disaster. Remember, the rupee is 77.5 at the moment. Vivek Ranjan Agnihotri, June 24, 2012, of Kashmir Files fame. The director says, may your happiness increase like petrol prices, may your sorrow fall like the Indian rupee, and may your joy fill your heart like corruption in India. Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar on March 21, 2014. It is refreshing to know that the rupee will get stronger at rupees 40 per dollar if Mr. Modi comes to power. It is now 77 and counting again, Mr. Gurudev. Anupam Kher, August 28, 2014. The actor says, सब कुछ गिर रहा है, रुपए की कीमत और इंसान की कीमत. हम उस देश के वासी है जिस देश में गंगा रोती है. Their comments on the fuel price hike at the time were equally stinging. Anupam Kher, 13th October 2012, asked my driver, why are you late? Sir, came by cycle. What happened to your motorcycle? His reply, sir, it is kept at home now as a showpiece. Akshay Kumar, star actor, 27/12/2012 says, guys, I think it's time to clean up your bicycles and hit the road, as per sources expecting another petrol price hike. Remember, petrol has now crossed Don Bradman's average and well beyond over 100. That time it was much lower. Amitabh Bachchan again, 25 May 2012. Petrol up rupees 7.5. Pump attendant, कितने का डालूं? मुंबई कर 2 से 4 रुपए का कार के ऊपर स्प्रे कर दे भाई, जलाना है. And Swami Ramdev on 8th August 2012, काला धन वापस आए तो पेट्रोल 30 रुपए में मिलेगी. Of course, I've only cited a few people here. There are many more. I've also stayed away from commenting on what the same netas who are in government said when they were in the opposition. Because as I said at the outset, netas are known, politicians do speak with a forked tongue depending on where they sit, opposition or the government. But even so, 3 comments are worth citing. First, from the BJP's most familiar and popular TV face spokesperson, the one and only Sambit Patra. He said on 17 February 2014, Chidambaram insists GDP would grow in future, but that GDP would mean gas, diesel and petrol. Well said, Mr. Patra. Second is from the BJP's senior leader and then the party's deputy leader in the Rajya Sabha, Ravi Shankar Prasad, who said on July 10, 2013, the worth of the Indian rupee against the dollar was equivalent to Rahul Gandhi's age when the UPA came to power. Today it is equal to Sonia Gandhi's age. Very soon it will touch Manmohan Singh's age. Rather caustic, I might say here. And finally, there is Prime Minister Modi himself, then Gujarat Chief Minister, who said on August 24, 2013 in Rajkot, there was a time when the Indian rupee was making lots of noise, but today it has lost its voice. And similarly, we are unable to hear the voice of our Prime Minister. Both have turned mute. Today, of course, it's the BJP which is in government that is mostly mute, and the opposition, which is the Congress and other parties, that are making all the noise on falling rupee and rising inflation. Once again, let me reiterate, nothing surprising in that, because that is the consequence of hyper-partisan politics, where politicians will say one thing in government and one thing in the opposition. But what of our civil society leaders? Why do they choose to play political games? Why do our civil society leaders say one thing when the rupee was falling in 2013 and prices were rising, and stay silent in 2022 or speak a very different language? Was a weakened Dr. Singh quite simply a much softer target for all these worthies than an all-powerful Prime Minister like Mr. Modi is today? Or is it that many of our civil society heroes are actually also politicians in disguise? Think about it. That was the Straight Bat. Do of course subscribe to my YouTube channel for many more such videos. For now, stay well, stay safe. Jai Hind, Namaskar.